Before I get started today, I just want to remind everybody, if I reach 100 subscribers before finishing this book over the next few days, then I will actually choose a subscriber based on comments left and give them this novel. I will ship it to them for free. Now we will continue reading Friday the 13th, Church of the Divine Psychopath by Scott Phillips. Chapter 6. She was going to lose her husband. Loren realized she'd been trying to file the same paperback for the last 15 minutes. She stared at the cover, finally registering Hard Case by Luke Short. Hell, she wasn't even in the Western section. Loren gripped the cart holding the books that needed shelving and pushed it along ahead of her, rounding the mystery section and heading for Westerns. The only thing she'd sold more of than Western paperbacks were romance novels, and she had plenty of both that needed to be put on the racks. Got to keep the books moving. I got to keep the money flowing. The used bookstore had done surprisingly well, and Loren loved running the place. She liked most of her customers, but she loved the smell of the old paperbacks and the cover art on the science fiction novels. Sometimes she got lost in her own head while staring at those, but for an entirely different reason. How could she talk him out of it? Was there anything she could say besides, "Please don't go. I don't want you to die," that would make Walter change his mind about this goddamn operation? God knew she'd said that enough times. If it was ever going to work, it would have done so before now. It was the man's uncanny dedication and discipline, the same qualities that had drawn her to him in the first place, that were going to get him killed. And just when she thought she was going to be able to keep him. Loren knew that the mess with the raid on the yuppie drug assholes had wrecked Walter inside, not to mention derailed his career. But she absolutely hated that fucking career. She could never tell him to his face, but she had been overjoyed when she learned that he was going to be driven out of the agency, that his days as a human target were finally over. No more getting shot at in order to collect a paycheck. Sure, she had been joking about the bank teller thing, but she knew he could find something else to do, something that would give him a sense of satisfaction and allow her to get some sleep at night. Jason fucking Voorhees. Loren wasn't sure if she actually believed the killer existed, but she knew one thing from all the stories. Nobody sees Jason Voorhees and lives. Of course, Jason was known for killing horny, dope-smoking teenagers, and while Walter was most certainly the horniest man she had ever encountered, he was pretty far from fitting the bill otherwise. So maybe that would be a point in his favor when the machete started swinging. Loren leaned against the rack of wooden bookshelves. She felt sick to her stomach. There was no doubt about it. She adored Jeff Townsend, but why couldn't the big bastard have left well enough alone? If he really felt like he owed Walter so much, why couldn't he let him have a decent, safe life with the woman who loved him? Loren was staring at the Luke Short novel again. Oh my God, she whispered to herself, embarrassed. Scanning the shelves, she found a suitable spot for it. At the rate she was going, she'd have the cart shelved in about 4 or 5 days. Loren pulled another book from the cart. Luke Short again. How many books did this guy write? All those Weston authors seem to have an incredible ability to crank out the words, assuming, of course, that the authors weren't a number of different writers and editors jostled together under a publishing house's pen name. She quickly shelved the book before she could become mesmerized by it. A few years back, she had almost lost Walter. He was just starting out with the agency then. The agency. Loren sneered at the thought. Bunch of shady motherfuckers, so secretive they couldn't even give their particular branch of the government a real name. Sure, they might spend the biggest proportion of their time busting up drug labs, but there was a whole bunch of crap they were up to that was black as coal. Walter had been on any number of operations that he couldn't talk about, not even to his beloved wife. It had been on one such operation when he'd almost been killed. To this day, she didn't know all the details, and even under the circumstances, Walter refused to tell her what had really happened. All she knew was that something had been seriously wrong with the operation, and he had been shot. 2 slugs in the chest and 1 in the stomach. The doctors had to cut most of his insides out of him and keep them in a bucket while they repaired the damage. He had actually died during the prolonged surgery, but only for a matter of seconds before they had jump-started his heart. Walter was one big open wound for about a week until the surgeons put his guts back in and stitched him up. When he came around, she had asked him if he had had any kind of out-of-body experience during the moments that he was dead, but he didn't remember anything and just wanted to make out with her. He was sporting a magnificent road map of scars on his torso as a reminder of this incident. Every time Loren saw him with his shirt off, she thought about how close she had come to losing him. Sighing, Loren poked around at her cart of books. She had hoped that going about her usual task would help take her mind off things, but her heart just wasn't in it. If he had just lost his right eye when the yuppie hit them with that bat... Loren felt cruel and selfish for even thinking of it, but she knew the agency wouldn't let a one-eyed operator go on a raid. She figured she could live with the partially blind Walter much better than she could live with no Walter at all. A one-eyed man could still find her in the dark, still hold her with the fierce love that she felt that burned from within Walter every time he embraced her. Jesus. She was starting to sound like one of those goddamn romance novels. Back to the westerns. At least she'd been perusing manlier material if she kept shelving. Another Luke Short book found its place on the rack. A thought struck her. She ran a damn bookstore, for Pete's sake. Maybe she had some kind of reference material, a little light reading for bedtime. Putting aside her shelving work, she walked to the true crime section and began scanning the shelves. There were books about Ed Gein, John Wayne Gacy, the Zodiac Killer, Albert Fish, the son of Sam, Richard Ramirez, and numerous volumes on the Manson family, but nothing on Jason Voorhees. Loren checked the titles again. Maybe she had just missed it. Surely somebody out there had cashed in on the Camp Crystal Lake murders by writing a book about them. Again, she came up empty. She sank to the floor in front of the bookshelves and stared blankly at the spines of all the paperbacks. Then she started crying. Kelly rolled onto her side, gathering the blankets around her. It was summer, for Christ's sake. How could it be so damn cold in this stupid cabin? She laid curled on the top bunk, staring across the room. The pale moonlight flittering through the windows did little to illuminate the interior of the cabin, and even if it had, there wasn't much to see. She was bunked with several other single women from the congregation, and what had at first sounded like a perpetual slumber party in the making had instead turned out to be Dullsville extraordinaire. These fine church-going chickies all liked to be in the bed way too early for Kelly's taste. And even though she was forced to get up at the freaking ass crack of sunup, like everyone else, or risk missing breakfast, her previous nocturnal lifestyle was hanging on for dear life, and she was praying for it, with a lack of sleep. Lights out usually came around 10 p.m., and Kelly found herself tossing and turning in utter boredom until after 2 in the morning. And with all the work going on in the camp, she hardly ever managed to sneak off for a power nap during the day. The bags that had appeared under her eyes a couple days before were rapidly on their way to becoming cargo containers. Kelly sighed deeply. When she was a kid, she had dreamed of going to summer camp. Even when she was watching movies like Piranha, with kids at camp being eaten alive by crazed fish, she always thought it looked like a great place to be. Just stay out of the fucking water, right? She had spent many an hour daydreaming about practicing her archery, climbing ropes, roasting marshmallows around the campfire at night, not to mention making out with the boys in a pleasant woodland environment. Now she just longed for her comfy chair and some late-night television. Of course, those childhood dreams of campground shenanigans never centered around Camp Crystal Lake. That is for fucking sure. Instead of having a good time, she spent all day making sure she was close to other people, even if doing so made her appear to be completely nuts to those people. Like the time she had forcibly dragged Susan Perkins into the bathroom with her so she wouldn't have to pee alone. And at night, she jumped at the slightest little sound, and the goddamn forest was absolutely full of things that made sounds from sunset to sunrise. Squirrels, Kelly always told herself, but in reality, she suspected that many of those things out there were much, much larger. She knew she had heard something big shuffling around the window closest to her bunk the other night. That is for sure. She was glad Denise Keenan had insisted on having the bottom bunk, claiming that her bad legs made it too difficult for her to climb the ladder. And how the hell does a woman in her late 20s have bad legs? Perhaps by piling all that Twinkie-produced weight on top of the unfortunate, spindly limbs? If some large woodland creature were to chew its way into the cabin, maybe it would eat Denise first and give Kelly time to escape. Lord knew the chubby gimp would provide a heartier meal than Kelly would. Kelly flopped over on her back and stared at the ceiling. She was doing it again, being horrible. Denise, like everybody else in the congregation, was friendly to the point of being suffocating. And here she was making fun of the poor woman's weight problem. Maybe it was an out-of-control gland or virus, and not a overindulgence in tasty treats. Or maybe she was just too fucking fat and needed to lay off the chocolates. Climb some goddamn ropes and run some wind sprints. Kelly cupped her face in her hands and yawned. If she could just shut her brain off for a while, maybe she could get some sleep, and she wouldn't be so damn cranky and lie around thinking terrible things about fat ladies. She needed to face the truth. She had probably made a big mistake in coming here. Father Long might be sexy as hell. Maybe he was even sporting a 17-inch dong, but he had been doing everything short of blatantly avoiding Kelly since the day the congregation rolled into camp. And living with church people, with the possible exception of Meredith, was flat out boring. At least they had yet to sit around the campfire singing Kumbaya, my lord. But life at the camp was definitely a non-stop carnival of monotony. Hell, even Meredith had been acting a little weird lately, kind of subdued, like she wasn't feeling well. Maybe she was on her period. Whatever it was, the girl wasn't willing to talk about it. A thought occurred to Kelly. Had Jason killed anyone in this cabin? Maybe in this very bunk that she's laying in? He had murdered like 8,000 people or thereabouts, right? Surely at least one of them had been slaughtered in this room. She slithered towards the edge of the bed and peered off into the hazy moonlight, looking for telltale stains of dried blood on the wood floor. Wait a minute. Where was the body? If it had really been Jason on the cross back in the old strip mall church, Father Long had to have had the corpse tucked away somewhere. Unless, of course, it hadn't been Jason at all. Kelly racked her memory of that night. Was Don James there? She had been so intent on the sight of Jason Voorhees strapped to the cross, and who wouldn't have been? She couldn't recall much else from that night. She was pretty sure Don hadn't been around, though, which meant he could have been stuffed into the Jason costume. She'd never seen Don James and Superman in the same room either, after all. Dangling her head over the side of her bunk, Kelly listened to Denise's strained, fat girl breathing. I'm sorry, Denise, she thought. You've got a bitch for a roommate, but oh my, you are indeed fucking fat. Something thunked against the wall near the cabin's door. Kelly jumped sharply, gasping. Holding her breath, she listened intently. The seconds dragged by. Then an odd tick-tick scrape emanated from the base of the door. Claws, perhaps? Something with claws trying to find a way in? Or a machete blade being dragged across the surface of the door? No, not a machete blade. Not a machete blade at all. Was the door locked? And why didn't Fatso in the bunk below her wake the fuck up so she wouldn't be facing this threat by herself? Another thump. This time Kelly saw the door shudder in its frame. Straining not to make a sound, Kelly slowly worked her way backwards until she was pressed against the wall. The covers pulled up to her chin. She stared at the door. A half hour later, she was still staring. Whatever or whoever was out there had apparently wandered off. The only sound in the dark cabin was Denise Keenan's labored breathing. Kelly needed to pee so badly her insides ached. But there was no way she was leaving that bunk, even if she could convince somebody to go with her. I want to go home, Kelly whispered very softly. 3 large crows pecked viciously at the roadkill splattered across the center lane of the 2-lane highway. One of the well-fed birds violently punched its sharp beak deep into the carcass, coming up with the stringy length of heat-bloated intestine. Immediately, the other birds launched themselves at the gory prize, but the lucky crow took wing, flapping away with the gooey bit of the viscera trailing behind it. Undaunted, the 2 remaining birds returned to their feast, cawing raucously as they ripped at the dead animal's flesh. Then the Stryker M1126 light armored vehicle rode into view, sending the crows fluttering skyward in a squawking panic. The roadkill carcass was torn to shreds beneath the 8 massive tires humming along the pavement, bits of rendered meat spattering against the half-inch thick steel body of the vehicle. If the rapidly departing crows had been interested, they would have seen 2 more LAVs cruising along behind the first. The flat black, unmarked infantry carriers were traveling at just under their maximum speed, about 60 miles per hour. Their ceramic skin armor shielding was capable of shrugging off 14.5mm armor-piercing rounds, and unless one Mr. Jason Voorhees had recently begun purchasing black market weaponry, it was unlikely they'd face much more than a machete or a pitchfork. Wedged into the narrow driver's seat of the lead vehicle, strike team operator Benjamin Hurley let out a loud whoop. I think we just drew first blood. Back in the crew compartment, operator Samantha, dog day after noon, leaned out to yell at the driver. Ah, shit, Hurley. You didn't hit another kid, did you? I don't want to have to pick another pair of sneakers out of the grill. Yeah, I hear you prefer picking pubic hair out of your teeth, Hurley replied. Samantha Noon viciously snapped her teeth at him, but Hurley's eyes were on the road. At 20 years old, Noon was the youngest member of the strike team. Her chiseled beauty, stylishly close-cropped black hair, and icy blue eyes belied the woman's demeanor. She was fresh out of boot camp and had earned her spot on the team by being notorious for kicking asses with little provocation, but disciplined enough to save it for off-duty hours. Noon had been banned from 7 bars in her hometown, meaning she only had 2 choices left when it came to drinking, and fortunately for her, one of those last 2 watering holes was owned by her dad. If Charles Bronson were an especially sexy woman, he would have been Samantha Noon. Another 6 members of the strike team were seated with Noon in the crew compartment, on the barely padded benches running along either side. All the operators were clad in black fatigues and bulletproof vests, sporting numerous pockets for equipment and ammo. For comfort's sake, their Kevlar helmets were gripped between their feet, and their black gloves dangled from their belts. Jeff Townsend sat at the back of the vehicle, just inside the main hatch, his head lolling from side to side. He was sound asleep. Noon watched her commanding officer for a moment, smiling. "Look at that shit," she said, pointing at the drawer running down Townsend's chin and onto his armor vest. "Ain't he cute?" Operator Bruno Ortega purred. Ortega was exactly what one might expect from a guy named Bruno. Thick and brawny with a face like a bulldog. Maybe he'll wet his pants, too. Then he can have Hob change his fucking diaper, Noon snarled. A burst of salty laughter rang out in the lab. Townsend, lost in his dreams, was oblivious to the rude comments. In the second lab, Walter Hobb wasn't feeling quite as relaxed as his friend, although he would have given anything to be sleeping through this. From the moment the strike team was assembled, Hobb had been the kid nobody wanted to sit with in the cafeteria. He couldn't blame the others, really. After all, he'd been responsible for 2 of his men being slaughtered in the raid on the Yuppie Meth Lab, wasn't he? His fiercely red 8-ball hemorrhage didn't seem to add to his charisma either. He found that most people, if they could bring themselves to look at him in the eye at all, immediately suffered a severe case of watery eyes. Not only was he a pariah, he was a freaky-looking one. Some of the team members were a little more open with their disdain for Hobb than others. In particular, Townsend's second-in-command, Chris Sieber. The element leader took every opportunity to pick at Hobbs' scabs. Townsend had already had to dress Sieber down more than once before they'd even left the base. Hobb expected it would only get worse once they were in the field. He was thankful that Sieber was driving the 3rd lab, instead of being cooped up with him. It was easier to ride with 8 people who hated him, but kept their thoughts to themselves, than with one loudmouth carrying a hubcap-sized chip on his shoulder. And then there was the little matter of Loren wanting to kill him, or at least divorce him. As it turned out, she was relatively serious about that bank teller crack, and nearly went through the roof when he told her about Townsend's offer. She'd become used to the idea that her husband would resign from the agency and spend his days doing some kind of pleasant office work in an environment where nobody opened up on him with automatic weapons. They hadn't fought so hard in years, only this time they didn't kiss and make up. Loren had cried again the morning he left. Walking out the door of their house and shutting it behind him was the hardest thing he'd ever done in his life. He figured it was going to take a hell of a lot to smooth things over with her this time. Hobb felt like his guts were dragging in the dirt, but at least he was going to spend some time in the woods hunting for an unstoppable mass murderer, so the picture wasn't entirely bleak. Chapter 7. Mark Brody was the first member of the congregation to hear the vehicles approaching. He was by himself in the field they had chosen for the garden, clearing ground cover to make way for planting. When he heard the increasing growl of powerful engines, the racket annoyed Brody. Working out here where the only sound was provided by the birds flitting through the trees was his favorite activity. Standing, he slipped his heavy work gloves off and slapped them against his pant legs, beating the dust out of them. He cocked his head from side to side, wondering if he could see the highway from where he stood. Too many trees for that, thank the Lord. He'd had enough of cars and traffic. Now he just wanted peace and quiet and his hands in the soil. Until the judgment came down, anyway. He still didn't feel too confident about his ability to pass, despite Father Long's reassurances. That was another reason he liked working in the garden all by himself. It took his mind off his constant nagging self-doubt, not to mention the question of when. When would the vessel return to reap the harvest of unclean souls? The entire congregation was filled with a sense of foreboding. You could feel it radiating from them, even if no one discussed it openly. The dual apprehension hanging in the air reminded Brody of the miserable months he had spent living in Los Angeles, where everybody seemed to be struggling under the oppressive burden of waiting for this earthquake that would finally shake the city off into the sea. He credited a lot of LA's debauchery to that particular phenomenon. When people feel like their lives could end at any moment, and in spectacular fashion at that, it only makes sense that they lose themselves in drugs and sex, and Lord only knew what other wanton behavior. He had heard whisperings of a cult that routinely dined on human flesh, capturing runaways and other unfortunates to be used as sacrifices. It was a credit to Father Long's teachings that his followers went about their daily lives without complaints. Brody frowned. What was making all that noise? Some sort of construction equipment heading out to clear up the remains of the failed housing developments? No. The engines were getting louder, and the main highway curved away from the field he was in. Whatever was coming, it was headed for Camp Crystal Lake. Curious Brody started off across the field, towards the dirt road that led to the campground. He caught glimpses of them through the trees before he reached the road. Wedge-shaped military vehicles of some kind. 3 of them. The Army? What on earth would the Army want here, of all places? Breaking into a run, Brody burst from the tree line just as the armored vehicles rumbled past. He tripped, falling to his knees near the road's edge, gazing up at the massive transports with an open-mouthed stare. The engines were so loud at this range that they rattled Brody's ability to even think straight. As the lavs passed, he shuffled backwards and got to his feet, still staring at the passing vehicles. Whatever this was about, it couldn't be good for the ministry. Brody took off running, hoping he could somehow reach the campground before the tanks, or whatever they were, made it there. Kelly and Meredith had almost walked to the opposite side of the lake from the campground when they heard the lavs roll in. She was supposed to be helping out in the kitchen, but when Meredith had come to her with an incredibly sad look on her face saying she needed to talk, Kelly figured whatever she might have to offer in the way of kitchen aid could take a flying leap. She was grateful for the opportunity to get away from everyone else anyways. It seemed like every damn member of the church always managed to see the bright side of every fucking thing, and Kelly hadn't reached the point where she could have paid $20 just to hear someone bitch a little or pick holes. Or at least commiserate with her, instead of telling her that her skin looked healthier without makeup on, or that there's too much violence on television, or that donuts make you fat. Shit, that was what she wanted. To smear her face with thick goth girl eyeliner, watch CS fucking I, and eat an entire fucking box of Krispy Kremes. Then call her friend and spend a couple hours talking about how men suck, but they sure would like to get into the pants of that new bartender at Bert's Tiki Lounge. If she heard the sweet-natured chirping of one more cheerful person, Kelly thought she might gouge her own heart out with a sharpened stick. Which is what had made talking to Meredith so cool, at least until Kelly realized that the girl was dealing with some seriously fucked up shit. They had started out talking about random stuff, day-to-day junk that they both missed, like not having to walk around in the woods at night to go pee, or the easy availability of MTV. But as they got farther away from the campground and potential prying eyes, Meredith had begun to open up. And what she was saying was giving Kelly the serious creeps. Talking so fast that she stumbled over her own words, the girl had told Kelly about the weird shit Curtis Rickles had said and done on the drive out. Real sneaky, bad touch uncle kind of stuff. Things that made Kelly want to cut the guy's balls off with a blunt kitchen knife, ex-Marine or not. From the way Meredith told it, it was obvious Rickles was an old hand at plying naive teenage girls. Meredith was fucking 17 for Christ's sake. And he would do so with sly wordplay, confusing them so they'd think they were the ones being bad. And it hadn't ended on the drive. Rickles had kept it up since then, always being devious about it, but pushing a little harder every time. Like showing up at the cabin Meredith and her parents were bunked in when she was alone. That shit doesn't happen unless somebody's paying close attention to the girl's movements. There were 4 families sharing that cabin. It had to be a miracle for anyone to ever be alone in there. And while alone in the cabin with Meredith and helping her make her bed, like that didn't set off the Pervo alarms all by itself, Rickles had leaned in and huffed the sheets, telling Meredith the bed smelled pretty, just like she did. "I'll bet this bed's nice and cozy," the creepy son of a bitch had said, running his fingers over it like he was petting a dog. He had found a need to work on the plumbing in the bathroom while Meredith was taking a shower as well. The list of atrocities went on and on, something disturbing happening every day since they had arrived at Camp Crystal Lake. "Did you tell Father Long?" Kelly had asked Meredith. "Yeah, but..." Meredith hesitated. "But what?" Meredith looked guilty at Kelly. "I know you like him, but it was weird." Kelly felt her heart sink. "Weird how?" she asked, not really wanting to hear the answer. "He started talking about babies and stuff." What? Like, how he has this vision of the future with lots of children and families, and it was just weird. Kelly nibbled worriedly at her lower lip. She didn't hear it herself. Maybe Meredith misunderstood what Father Long was saying. "I think he wants me to marry Mr. Rickles," Meredith said, "and have babies with him." Kelly stared blankly at the girl. "Marry him? It's kind of gross," Meredith added. "No fucking shit," Kelly wanted to say. "Do you remember his exact words? Did he say, like, anything else?" "Yeah." Meredith thought about it for a moment, trying to recall. "I mean, not his exact words, but I kind of felt like he wanted me to be some kind of a reward for Mr. Rickles or something. For services rendered. Just leave the teenage girl on the dresser." "So he was, like, encouraging you to... Kelly struggled with her words. "Be nice to Rickles?" "Yeah, kind of. Like I said, it was weird." Meredith stared at Kelly for a few moments, doe-eyed and dreamy. "I like you, Kelly." "I know, I like you too," Kelly said, missing the girl's point. "But I need you to answer me. Do you think Long wants you to sleep with Rickles?" She was already trying to figure out how to get to a phone, call somebody who could come get her and Meredith, take them away from the camp. She had to get the girl out of there before Rickles could collect his little reward in full. Smiling slyly, Meredith reached out and pressed her fingertip against Kelly's left breast, holding it there. "Plork," she whispered. Kelly stared down at the finger jabbing her in the tip for what seemed like a very long time indeed. What was going on around here? She looked at Meredith again, unable to make her lips and tongue work out of sheer stunned bewilderment. It was like the entire goddamn world had gone completely insane overnight. "I know it's wrong," Meredith said, her words trembling with naughty excitement, "but I really like you." This was nuts. How the hell had Kelly suddenly become the old pervert? How had she gone from older sister to object of lesbian desire without even having a clue as to what was occurring? "You're touching my boob," Kelly said stupidly. Somehow Meredith read that as an open invitation. Instead of removing the offending digit, she cupped the underside of Kelly's breast in her fingers and actually lifted it, as if testing the weight. "No, I mean, don't," Kelly said, grabbing Meredith's wrist and pushing her hand away. The girl looked stricken. She awkwardly backed away from Kelly, her lip quivering as if she might cry. "I know it's a sin," she said. "A terrible, terrible sin. I tried, really I did. But it's like this thing inside me." "No, it's okay." Kelly stepped toward Meredith. "I thought you liked me." "I do, it's just..." What the hell should she say to this girl? "You're a hot little number, honey, but I gots to have the cock?" Or perhaps, "Come see me on your 18th birthday, and if I get drunk enough, maybe we'll leave the old labia then." No, neither of those really suited the occasion. "I could go to jail," Kelly thoughtlessly blurted. Meredith's eyes lit up. "Way to go, Kelly. Dig that hole a little deeper." "No one would find out," Meredith promised. "Hoo boy, that wouldn't make it right," Kelly said. "Any more than what's happening with Rickles is right." Meredith sneered at the mention of the creepy old man. "But it's different. I really like you." And that, fortunately for Kelly, was when those big black tanks arrived on the scene. A bunch of goddamn campers. Hobb couldn't believe his eyes as he piled out the back hatch of the lab he rode in. How the hell had this happened? These people weren't supposed to be here. Of course, the campers probably thought the same thing, seeing 20 black-clad men and women leaping from the enormous armored vehicles, slapping helmets on and driving ammo cassettes into their intimidating weaponry. It was a terrifying sight until Ortega slipped in a patch of mud and landed on his ass. Samantha Noon was the only person with balls enough to laugh at the man, though. The agency was becoming rather adept at withholding intelligence, Hobb reflected, or failing to gather any, as the case may be. He wondered who they had sitting in that dark room, staring into computer screens and apparently forgetting to jot down reasonably important bits of information, like the fact that the supposedly empty campground the strike team was sent to infiltrate was completely occupied. Some of the operators took up defensive positions, while others merely stood around, staring at the unexpected residents of the campground. Hobb was one of those who just stared, although he put forth a great deal of internal effort in cursing his bad luck. Surely this situation would somehow find a way to wind up being yet another dick in his ass. He glanced back to see Chris Seaver, his head jutting up out of the third lab's front hatch, giving him a look that would have freeze-dried a dog turd. The guy definitely did not like Hobb. A lanky guy who had "leader of the pack" written all over him took a few hesitant steps towards the strike team. Hobb watched as Jeff Townsend approached the man, shoving his helmet onto his head and slinging his rifle. Can I help you folks?" the lanky guy asked, holding his hands up slightly and flashing a nervous smile. Charismatic though the grin may have been, Townsend was unmoved. "What are you doing here? Are you people authorized to be here?" Townsend's eyes quickly traveled across the 24 or so potential targets, timidly gathering on the scene, ticking off their exact number in his head. 23, including the ostensible leader. Hobb caught movement out of the corner of his eye. 6 operators, including Noon and Ortega, were taking up fire in flank positions, covering the people they could see and preparing for any they couldn't. Are you authorized?" the lanky guy asked. Hobb winced. "Bad move, lanky guy. Be nice to the giant with the belt-fed machine gun and his friends." "I can assure you that we are, sir," Townsend replied in a clipped military tone. Lanky guy proffered his hand. "I'm Father Eric Long," he said, voice as smooth as glass. "I own the lease on this here property." Now how the flaming fuck could that slip by without anyone noticing, Hobb wondered. Somebody buys the lease on Camp Crystal Lake and the agency doesn't know about it. Shit like that should be in the papers, on the evening news, and it sure as hell ought to be screaming across the computer monitors on the high-paid agency intel guys we're gazing into. Townsend ignored Long's outstretched hand. Withdrawing it, Long looked at the operators spread out around him, their weapons at the ready. "Your men." He paused, squinting and sizing up Samantha Noon. "And women can put away their guns. We're all pretty harmless here, just peaceable, church-going folk." He brought out that pleasant smile again. "Church?" Townsend asked, confused. "The ministry of the heavenly vessel," Long said. "Didn't you see the sign on your way in?" "Must have missed it." At the sound of running footsteps on the road behind them, several of the operators whirled, leveling their guns on the terrified figure of Mark Brody. He froze in his tracks, his hands flying upward, as he stared wide-eyed in fear at the firepower that was trained in his direction. Tension was thick in the air. "It's okay," Father Long yelled. "He's with us." "Yeah, we figured that out, dipshit," Samantha Noon muttered. As tension eased and guns were lowered, Long waved Brody forward. "Come on, Mark, it's all right." Brody gave a questioning look to the nearest operator, who glanced at Townsend for the okay. Townsend nodded, and the operator passed it on to Brody, who uneasily walked the gauntlet of armed men and women to join the other members of the congregation. By now, a handful of other people were appearing from within the cabins, drawn by the hubbub outside. Hobb counted 33 with only a couple that concerned him. The crusty-looking dude with missing teeth, who was keeping to the shadows in the main building's doorway, and the ex-con or ex-biker, he had the tattoos for either option, who had taken up a position close behind Long. His weightlifter arms folded across his chest to display the artistically enhanced muscles. Everyone else looked pretty harmless, although some had a crazy look in their eyes. Anybody who'd go to church at Camp Crystal Lake needed to be a little crazy, Hobb guessed. Townsend addressed Long. "I'm going to need to see that lease, sir." Not a problem at all." He turned to speak to Mr. Tattoos. "Don, would you go to my office and bring me the paperwork for the lease? It's in the middle desk drawer. I believe it's unlocked." Don nodded and started off towards the main building. Hobb thought they should send a couple men inside with the guy to make sure nothing untoward went on while he was out of sight, and was pleased to see that he and Townsend shared a brain. Townsend signaled two of the operators, who hustled to catch up with Mr. Tattoos and accompany him on his way. "Can you explain what this is all about?" Long asked Townsend. "I mean, armed soldiers rolling up here in tanks. I know there are folks in town who weren't too happy when we moved in out here, but this is all..." He made a sweeping gesture with his arm, taking in the operators and the labs. "Seems a bit extreme. Has there been some kind of complaint about us?" As Long spoke, Hobb thought he caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a pair of sexy girls moving through the trees down by the lake, heading towards the gathering. "No, sir. No complaints at all," Townsend told Long. "In fact, I'll be honest with you. You people are as big a surprise to us as we are to you. We had no idea anybody was in residence out here." Hobb continued to watch the tree line. Yup, there they were again. As the two girls got closer, Hobb realized that one of them was probably about 15 years old, but the other was definitely of legal age, and she was more than acceptable material for one's viewing pleasure. If he wasn't a happily married man, of course, he might be interested in her. Assuming he could still make that claim about being married. Hobb wondered how Loren was even doing, if her anger towards him had softened any in the hours since he'd left home. The girls, okay, girl and woman, hurried over to join the other members of the congregation. They were out of breath and looked about as scared as was to be expected under these circumstances. There was something about the older one, though. She almost looked happy to see the strike team. What's going on?" the younger girl asked, taking the arm of an old man, her dad, no doubt, although the old duffer had obviously gone to work a little late when it came to fathering the kid. Long smiled reassuringly at the girl. "That's what we're trying to figure out, Meredith. Everything's okay, though. These gentlemen mean us no harm." From her vantage point, Noon sneered. "Not yet, anyway," Hobb heard her say. He looked back and shot a tiny smile at the woman. She didn't return it. Hobb was still looking in Noon's direction when he saw her trigger finger tense up. Turning back, he saw that Don had reappeared from the main building, gripping a stack of papers in one hand. The operators accompanying him dogged his heels. Everyone waited quietly as Don delivered the lease to Father Long, who handed it over to Townsend. "See," Long said, pointing at the paper, "it's all right there in black and white." Townsend flipped through the lease, pausing to read over parts of it. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "I hope not," Long said, smiling. A tiny grin flickered across Townsend's face. "Yes, sir." He handed the lease back to Long. "Guess we can't argue with your paperwork, Father. But be that as it may, I'm still going to have to ask you and your congregation to pack up and leave for a short time. And I'm going to have to ask why. I'm afraid I can't get into the specifics of it, sir, but I can tell you that you may not be safe here." Hobb was eyeing the woman who had walked out of the woods. She was positively vibrating like a kid who was trying not to piss her pants. "Well," Father Long said, pausing to consider his words, "even if that truly were the case, and I must say I do not agree with you, we've got nowhere else to go." "There's a motel in town," Townsend suggested. "I'm sure they'd have enough rooms for all of you." "And would they allow us to stay there out of the goodness of their hearts? We don't have money for motel rooms." "Don't let this get ugly, Jeff," Hobb thought. Townsend spoke softly but sternly. "I could order you to leave, sir." "You could try," Long smiled. "Oh boy, it's going to get ugly," Hobb sighed, then glanced at Mr. Tattoos and crusty, toothless guy. Both of them had tensed up, anticipating trouble. At this point, there wasn't much to worry about unless Long had a bunch of men hidden somewhere with sniper rifles at the ready. The congregation was facing off with almost 24 heavily armed and well-trained strike team operators. Surely they had the sense not to do anything stupid. Townsend broke the uncomfortable silence. "Then the responsibility for your people's safety rests on your shoulders." "No," Long corrected him. "Their safety rests in the hands of God." For several moments, the two men stared each other down like a couple of gunslingers in an Italian Western. "For your sake, I certainly hope so," Townsend said. Then he spun on his heels and signaled to his team, "Wrap it up and move it out." As the others jumped to follow the order, Hobb took one last look at the nervous woman. For an instant, he thought she was going to run after the strike team. Yes, sir. It was safe to say that something here was not right. Chapter 8. So let's take stock, Kelly thought, as she watched the honkin' big military vehicles roll away down the dirt road. Creepy perverts who want to get it on with, if not marry, 17-year-old girls. Check. Underage lesbian lust. Check. Attractive and charming but perhaps unbalanced preacher. Check. And now a platoon of soldiers trying to run all of us off the property. Check. Oh, yeah. And of course, the maggot-ridden corpse of Jason Voorhees hanging on a fucking cross. Can't leave that one out. Good times indeed. Check. And she may have just blown the one chance to get herself and Meredith out of there. Why didn't she speak up? Just run over to the soldier who kept looking at her and tell him what was going on. Because she was scared. That's why. At least she could finally admit that much to herself. She was scared of Curtis Rickles for sure. And as much as she hated to think it, she was scared of Father Long. Now that she was being honest with herself, she could see that the preacher had been a little on the spooky side from the beginning. If she took off running full tilt boogie, maybe she could catch the soldiers before they reached the road. Or maybe Rickles would catch her first. But what would he do? Surely Long wouldn't let anyone hurt her, or make anyone stay if they didn't want to. Surely. Hell, even Jim Jones let a handful of his followers leave Jonestown. Afterwards, of course, he sent a bunch of men with guns to kill them, all as they boarded the planes on the airstrip in Guana. But let's not split hairs. Kelly wondered if Long had a big batch of cyanide Kool-Aid set aside. What would it take to make him pass around the Dixie cups? She eyed the father suspiciously. Long was obviously agitated by the arrival of the soldiers. Kelly thought it was the first time she had seen him sweat, and he was doing that prodigiously. The sides of his shirt were soaked almost to his waist, and she could see droplets standing out on his forehead. As if sensing her eyes on him, Long turned to stare at Kelly, his face twisted with smoldering intensity. Startled by the man's expression, she tried to force a little smile, but he merely turned away to face his followers. That bizarre look still gripped his features, pulling them into a mask of madness, Kelly thought. His voice, taut and controlled, Long addressed the congregation. I want everyone to put aside their work for the rest of the day. I want you all to go to your cabins and pray. Make your peace with the Lord. His fervent gaze traveled across the worried faces of his followers. Trouble has found its way to our little ministry. The preacher turned, staring off down the road. The sound of the armored vehicles could still be heard, dwindling in the distance. Long took a deep breath, finally smiling again. The hand of judgment will be resurrected tonight. Everything in Kelly's body screamed at her to run, but she just couldn't do it. Curtis could feel the intense hatred rising within him as he had watched the armored troop transports roll away. He hated anything to do with the military, for one thing, but he particularly hated these bastards, because he had a very bad feeling they had just thrown an exceptionally large monkey wrench into his plans, and if Father Long was ready to resurrect the vessel, then he felt the same way. Who the hell were these assholes anyways? Rickles had carefully scoped out their uniforms looking for insignia, but they weren't sporting any that he could see. Decked out in black as they were, they could have been a SWAT team, but if that were the case, they would have been labeled as such. No, these guys were something else entirely. Black ops of some kind. But what did they want with the ministry? If it was about the guns the congregation kept locked away, it would have been a matter for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. You don't send out a team like that unless there's some serious shit going down. And Rickles didn't have a clue what that might. Wait a minute. Jason Voorhees. These guys were here to track down Jason Voorhees, the mass murderer of Camp Crystal Lake, Camp Blood. If he was right, then it seemed obvious the strike team, whoever the hell had sent them, were not aware that Father Long and the ministry were in possession of the body. They never would have rolled out of the campground like that if they had any idea they were practically on top of their mission objective. A smile spread across Rickles' face. This was a very interesting situation indeed. It was after nightfall by the time the strike team had set up their base camp. Leaving Camp Crystal Lake, they had driven a little further down the road until they came to the turnoff for the housing development that had succumbed to the realty sales crushing power of Jason fucking Voorhees. This put the team on the far side of the lake from the campground, their tents shadowed by a semicircle of abandoned two-story log cabins, frozen in various stages of construction. Many of the cabins had been vandalized, adding to the post-apocalyptic atmosphere. The place, to put it mildly, was creepy. Well fed with MREs, the 20 members of the strike team were busily engaged in various activities, not the least of which was cleaning and prepping their weaponry. Hobbs strode past the assortment of superior firepower the team had brought along. 10 FN MK-46 belt-fed machine guns, with both ammo cassettes and the glorious 200-round belt rail interface. The things barked out 5.5 caliber rounds fast enough to tear a man apart before the first chunks hit the ground. 5 MGL MK1 multiple grenade launchers, real nasty things capable of spitting out 40mm grenades in 3 seconds, each grenade dispensing enough high explosive driven ball bearings to tear a human to pieces. 5 shotguns equipped with both breaching rounds and double-aught buck. A heaping handful of claymore mines, an assortment of frag and red phosphorus grenades, and of course everybody carried their HK-M23 pistol, tricked out with laser aiming module slung under the barrel. Gun porn. He loved it. Jason Voorhees, unstoppable killer. Meet the motherfuckers who are going to stop you. Assuming, that is, if they could find the hockey mask-wearing freak. The current whereabouts of their quarry had been the subject of much discussion over dinner, and the talk was still raging. I say we send Noon out as bait, Ortega suggested. Put her in a bikini, or maybe have her make out with someone. The burly operator threw Chris Seaver a pointed look. Everybody knows Jason likes titties. You got some mighty fine bitch tits on you, Ortega, Seaver said. Maybe you ought to go topless, shake those babies around for a while, then we'll see who comes out of the woods. Noon let out a coarse laugh and knocked fists with Seaver. Most of the team knew they were knocking far more than that, but everybody kept quiet about it. Seaver had rank on Noon, and if word got out they were banging each other, it'd mean big trouble for the both of them. Hobb thought that might be the reason Seaver didn't stir the fudge a little more vigorously where he was concerned. The guy was afraid Hobb would squill. Not much chance of that. Hobb might punch Seaver's fucking lights out, but as long as their extracurricular activities didn't endanger the mission, he wasn't about to tell tales out of school. Hobb had kept to himself for the most part since they'd arrived, and figured he'd stay the course for the time being. It was pretty clear that the others didn't have a lot of love for him, and subjecting himself to their disdain wasn't at the top of his list of things to do. He'd be there when he needed to be. Hobb paused to peer into the back of Seaver's lab. Besides hauling all the camping gear, the vehicle had another unusual payload. The crew cargo area was nearly full of heavy metal lockboxes, each one about 2 foot by 2 foot. Jeff Townsend stepped into view a few yards away from Hobb. The two men exchanged a nod. Jeff hadn't exactly been friendly so far, but with good reason. Knowing their history, if the other members of the team saw Townsend and Hobb being all palsy-wowsy, they'd think their commanding officer was coddling the fuck up. Same reason you didn't want the teacher making a fuss over you if you were the kid who got picked on in school. It only made things worse. To be fair, there were a couple members of the team, Stilton and Blair specifically, who treated Hobb okay. They had approached Hobb after dinner and told him they thought the whole yuppie bloodbath was the agency's cross to bear, and that Hobb had been handed the shit end of the stick. Fucking newsflash, right? But at least that gave him 2 more in his corner. "Hey, Captain," Seaver shouted. Hobb and Townsend turned at the same time. Then Hobb remembered his position on the food chain. Townsend shot him a rueful grin. "Why didn't we just run those Jesus freaks out of there?" Seaver flashed a sneering smile at his fellows. "We could be doing this shit in log cabin comfort tonight." A couple of fuck yeahs rose from the team. "Because those Jesus freaks have a lease," Townsend said, "which gives them a legal right to the property, which means if we were to run them off, we make ourselves and the agency look real bad to the folks at home who see the weeping church folk on their evening news. Besides," Townsend added, "I didn't realize you were such a pussy, Seaver. Gotta have a comfy bed so you can get those good 8 hours, huh?" A chorus of taunts arose from the team. As his fellow operators gave Seaver a hard time over Townsend's good-natured affront, he snatched up an FN MK-46 and slammed the ammo cassette home. "Yeah, it's gonna be pussy this when me and my belt-fed wife-tamer meet up with Jason Voorhees, motherfuckers," Seaver hissed. That was all it took to turn the whole place into a feeding time at the monkey pen. Enthusiastic hoots and hollers filled the air as the combat-hungry operators waved clenched fists over their heads and stomped their boots in the dirt. It was positively tribal. Turning away from the boisterous scene, Hobb stared out across the surface of the water. The lights were burning brightly at Camp Crystal Lake. He wondered what the nervous young woman was doing right about now. In Crystal Lake's former cafeteria and current house of worship, Kelly Mills was practically shitting in her pants out of sheer, unadulterated fear. The entire congregation was gathered there, everyone seated on cold, uncomfortable metal folding chairs, the same ones that always tended to put Kelly's ass cheeks to sleep. And the effect was no different tonight, merely adding to her discomforts. Father Long paced at the head of the room, the sweating that had begun when the soldiers first appeared only increasing as the day wore on. The man's normally tousled locks were slicked to his head, and his button-down shirt clung to his wiry frame as he prowled the room. He looked, Kelly thought, like a junkie jonesing for a fix. She didn't know if everybody else was as scared as she was, but nobody was looking very cheerful. Meredith, whether out of anger or embarrassment after their encounter in the woods, had avoided Kelly all day. The girl was seated with her parents and looked as if she'd spent the last few hours crying, her eyes rubbed red and raw. Why hadn't she run? Why hadn't she run and made the soldiers come back? Kelly admonished herself. She might have been able to prevent whatever the hell was about to happen. When the soldiers had left and Long had sent the flock away to their cabins to pray, the other girls who bunked with her, fat old Denise Keenan, Laura Lee Picardi, Jennifer Crenshaw, and that cranky, vinegar-smelling spinster Charlotte Rutherford, had wanted Kelly to sit with them on the floor, huddled into a sniffling little circle and praying their little hearts out to Father, Son, and Holy Ghost so they wouldn't be judged too harshly when the moment came. And okay, so maybe it wasn't very neighborly of Kelly to tell the raggedy-ass bitches to fuck the hell off, but she had done it, and she wasn't proud of herself. And besides, she had just wanted to be alone. Under the circumstances, was that so much to ask? She had left those crazy cows weeping even harder than before and crawled into her bunk, buried her face in her pillow, and cried like a goddamn baby. If she weren't such a coward, none of them would be going through this right now. None of them would be waiting for Long to mix up that batch of Kool-Aid, Kelly thought bitterly. Kelly jumped in her seat as a horrific scraping sound emanated from the front of the room. She looked up to see Don James straining to open one of the windows. Bracing his feet against the floor and pushing so hard the veins in his arms distorted his tattoos. He managed to slide the window up a few inches. Just enough, apparently, because someone outside shoved what appeared to be oversized jumper cables for a car through the gap. Don grabbed the cables and pulled them further into the room, yelling, "Give me some slack! More slack!" over and over again. He pulled the cables over to where Long stood, dropping them. He exchanged a look with the father, then rushed down the center aisle, between the rows of folding chairs, and disappeared out the door. Kelly listened to the sound of his heavy footsteps clumping down the steps and fading away into the darkness. She stared after him for a moment. The door was standing wide open, unguarded. Why didn't she just leave? Because she didn't have any strength left, that's why. If she had had any to begin with. "The time of judgment is at hand," Father Long shouted suddenly. Kelly turned to watch the preacher. Long had fallen into pacing in a tight little circle, going around and around like a crazed animal in a zoo. Sweat dripped from his face. His bloodshot eyes threatened to bulge from their sockets. Kelly realized she was wearing her favorite little sundress, the one Father Long had complimented her on. Suddenly she hated it, wanted to tear it from her body. She stared at Long, amazed and embarrassed by the depths of her own foolishness. This was the man she had fallen for? The one she gave up everything for? This lunatic prowling the stage in front of them? "They'll take it away, you know. They always do," Long told his followers. "That's why those soldiers are here. Study your history. You'll see. And you don't have to go back very far to find an example." His pacing stopped suddenly, and he spun awkwardly on his heels to face the crowd, nearly falling down in the process. "What have I told you about the prophets?" he shouted. Nobody answered. Kelly's eyes flicked around the room. Many of the people were weeping, some hanging their heads in silence, not wanting to witness the horrible transformation that had overcome their shepherd. But there were some who gazed on in awe and rapt attention, still drawn to the man's charismatic power. Mark Brody, seated in the front row, was one of these people. When several moments had passed, without a response to Father Long's question, Brody turned to look at the others, his teeth clenched together, eyes moist but sharp. "Well," Brody snapped at the congregation, "where's your faith, brothers and sisters?" Still, no answer. Although someone sobbed loudly, wearily, Long held out his hand to Brody. "Come here, Mark." Brody twisted in his seat, turning back to face the preacher. Long adamantly thrust his hand at him. "Come," he insisted. "Join me. I need to have the faithful close at hand when the vessel returns to walk among us and mete out his judgment. Leaving his chair, Brody proudly walked over to stand a few yards away from Father Long. Holy fuck, Kelly thought. Please, God, if you're really truly up there, do not let this happen. Something was moving outside. She could hear it. A thump at the steps. Another. Kelly was afraid to look. Something was banging its way up the steps, making a hell of a lot of racket. Sealed in front of her, Roger, or Robert, turned his head looking past her. The chubby man let out a soft gasp. She had to look. Don James, Curtis Rickles, and 3 other men were dragging in what appeared to be a rather large body wrapped in canvas. 2 more men followed, lugging the wooden beams that would make up the cross. Kelly watched in stunned silence as the canvas-bound figure was slowly dragged past, up the aisle. The sounds as it slid across the floor were as the eeriest thing she'd ever heard. Kelly? She started at the sound of her name for a moment. She wasn't sure where it had come from, and she glanced around frantically. Long? It was Father Long. Hesitantly, she looked towards the preacher. He smiled at her, but the smile no longer held any charm. Perspiration traveled the folds in his face, rivers of sweat outlining his bared teeth. Kelly, would you please close the door? Close the door? Yes, could I trouble you, please? How could she possibly do that? She couldn't even move. Why did he want the door closed anyways? The door, Kelly, Long commanded. Roger or Robert rose from his chair. I'll get it. No, Long called out, his voice stopping Roger or Robert in his tracks. Sit down. Long was staring at her like a snake at its helpless prey. I want Kelly to do it. I'll throw up, she thought. Everyone was looking at her, waiting for her to comply with Father Long's order. If I just sit here and ignore him, maybe this will all stop. The door. Kelly. Trembling, Kelly lifted herself from her chair. The sweat-drenched bare skin on her back peeled away from the metal with an audible, sticky sound. She noticed that she had sweated through the fabric of the dress. Her nipples were clearly visible through the drenched cloth. A number of the male congregation, young and old, were staring at them. Why the hell were they so hard? Kelly stumbled as she stepped past the feet of people seated between her and the aisle, catching herself on the backs of the chairs in front of her. Ribbons of sweat trickled down her bare legs, soaking into her cotton socks. How long had it been since she had left her seat? She felt like she'd been moving close to the door for hours, like she'd been walking through molasses, like she was dreaming. How nice would it be if she were only dreaming? Somebody started hammering on something. Reaching the aisle, Kelly looked towards Father Long. Some of the men at the end of the room were nailing the cross together, while Rickles and Don James began carefully unwrapping the figure in the canvas. Kelly turned and shuffled towards the open door, moving like a zombie. Run, girl! No, I can't run. They'll catch me. Do things to me. Maybe even kill me. Stiffly, she reached out, gripping the edge of the door. She teetered there for a moment, trying to quell her nausea. Then she slammed the door shut, her weight lending volume to the sound. A few people gasped at the noise. Somehow it made her feel better. She considered returning to her seat, but decided she'd rather stand. Standing. That's almost a show of courage and strength, she told herself. Almost. And besides, being on her feet would make it easier to run if she needed to. The men at the front of the room were blocking her view, but she could see that someone was trying to put a large, bulky object up with the length of rope. She saw Curtis Rickles give Father Long a sober nod. Long turned to face the congregation once again, bringing his arms up, palms skyward, like Moses in the 10 Commandments, Kelly thought. Her head felt cloudy, thick. She wondered where those soldiers had gone, if they were somewhere close by. I say to you again, Long's voice boomed, the time of judgment is at hand. Behind him, Rickles and the others began to hoist the makeshift cross. Kelly watched in horror as the figure of Jason Voorhees appeared from within the small crowd of men, arms outstretched, wrists and ankles bound to the wooden beams. The cross rocked slightly as it was brought upright and locked into place. Jason's body shook, then was still. Kelly realized that the cables Don had dragged through the window were attached to the corpse. Clamped to narrow metal rods, the men had driven into the moldering flesh. A dense black sludge oozed like tar from the open wounds. You guys have been watching too many old horror movies, Kelly wanted to yell. She felt too sluggish and weary for a confrontation. It was easier to simply stare and not think too much, like watching television. Long appraised the body crucified before him. Let his eyes trail along the cables to where they exited through the window. A beatific expression on his sweat-glazed face, he addressed his stunned flock. "The rebirth of the vessel is upon us." Long stepped forward smiling. "Do not fear his judgment, for only those who do not give themselves over to the Lord shall know his anger." Long bent and picked up something from the floor. It was about 2.5, maybe 3 foot long, wrapped in cloth. His scepter? Kelly wondered. Carefully, reverently, Long unwrapped the item. Several loud gasps went up from the congregation upon sight of the machete blade. "The instrument of his judgment," Long explained. He approached the crucified figure of Jason Voorhees and respectfully laid the machete at the base of the cross. Rising, Long returned his attention to the congregation, Jason's tattered, lifeless body looming over him. "Camp Blood, they've called this place," Father Long began. "Many have seen it is a decadent blight, a scar upon God's creation, a gathering place for sin and debauchery." He shook his head. "So blind. Those people are so blind. If only they could see with the eyes of faith, they'd know the truth." Kelly felt her stomach tightening as Long's impromptu sermon continued to build. It was really going to happen. The maniac was going to do it. The preacher stalked the floor, jabbing a finger at the flock. "You have seen through the lies. You have embraced the truth. You see with the eyes of faith. You know what Camp Crystal Lake should rightfully be called. For it was here that God chose to deliver unto the faithful his heavenly vessel, his very hand upon the earth. This place, this ground, this is the Holy Land." Father Long raised his hand towards the body of Jason. "Tonight, the vessel will walk again amongst mankind, dealing out the Lord's judgments. Tonight, the avenging angel, Jason Voorhees, will go forth to continue his mission to cleanse the earth of all those who live in sin." Long punctuated his fiery words with a violent shake of his fist. At that, Curtis Rickles, standing near the open window, nodded to someone outside. Kelly heard an engine turn over, catch, and roar to life. The generator Rickles had towed behind his truck. Everyone, Father Long including, stood staring at the corpse bound to the cross. Rickles, obviously relishing his position, signaled to whomever was outside with the snap of his clenched fist. The whine of the generator increased feverishly. Suddenly, Jason's body was jolted violently as a massive burst of electricity surged through the cables till the rods plunged into his neck. Flung into an intense fit of twitching and jerking, the corpse thrashed upon the cross as the power coursed through the rotting meat that hung on its bones. One of his legs kicked free of the rope that bound it. The cross swayed dangerously, not stable enough to endure the brutal spasms. "Enough! Enough!" Long shrieked. Bits of filth and torn, smoldering fabric from the convulsing figure rained down on the preacher. Rickles signaled again, and the generator was hurriedly shut down. With the power gone, Jason's body shuddered one last time, then sagged against its bonds. Acrid smoke rose from within his tattered clothing. The smell of burnt flesh drifted throughout the room. It didn't work. Kelly felt suddenly giddy. It didn't work. They just cooked him. She let out a clipped, nervous laugh. If anyone else heard it, they didn't let on. The only sound Kelly was aware of was her own labored, panicky breath. She gaped at Jason's still and ravaged body hanging limply on the cross. Father Long stood beneath the unmoving figure, staring up at his veiled vision. "Curtis," he said after a long moment, "please examine the body." Curtis Rickles looked none too pleased to be given the task. His eyes flicked from the corpse to Long and back again. I'm sure it's just fine," he said, voice pinched. Slowly, Long turned his head to glower at his most loyal assistant. "I'm asking you, Mr. Rickles, to check for signs of life. A heartbeat, perhaps?" Fear rising within him, Rickles' gaze traveled across the faces of the men nearby, those who had helped raise the cross. Don James stared back at him with an expression that would have killed a lesser man. The others didn't seem much more eager to help him out. Despite everything else, Kelly found that she was glad to be here to witness Rickles' obvious terror serves the bastard right. "Brody," Rickles said, picking on someone. Mark Brody swallowed hard. "Mark?" Rickles forced a toothless smile. I bestow this honor upon you," Rickles told him, deftly passing the buck. Brody's dark skin glistened with sweat. He looked to Father Long for approval, but Long's attention was focused on Jason's lifeless corpse. Uncertain, Brody stepped towards the cross. Then, realizing he was going to need something to stand on, he grabbed a folding chair from the front row. Cautiously, he moved past Father Long and gently, quietly, placed the chair on the floor directly beneath the imposing figure. Brody gazed up at Jason. Wisping tendrils of smoke drifted giddily from the eye holes in the battered hockey mask. Trembling a little, Brody stepped up onto the chair. Kelly held her breath. The entire room seemed to do the same. The reek of scorched flesh was terrible at the back of the room. She could only imagine how bad the stench must have been from Brody's standpoint. As if in response to Kelly's thought, Brody gagged once, then caught himself. Standing upright atop the metal chair, he ever so gingerly leaned in towards Jason's chest to listen for a heartbeat, carefully, slowly, trying not to touch the body. And Jason's head jerked up. Yellow eyes burned from the dark depths of rotted sockets. Kelly screamed. Brody stood frozen, mouth hanging open. Father Long looked positively ecstatic. The massive murderer fiercely ripped his bound wrist free from the crossbeam he was lashed to. Not understanding that the ropes were all that held him aloft, toppling forward, Jason slammed into Mark Brody, knocking him from the chair. Brody hit the floor, the wind going out of him. He looked up to see Jason collapsing on top of him. Then the rope that still held Jason's right ankle to the cross jerked him to a stop. He dangled above Brody, clutching fingertips, brushing the wooden floor. With terrifying silence, Jason Voorhees flailed at the man pinned beneath him. Snagging a handful of Brody's shirt, he pulled him closer. Brody choked out a pained scream as Jason's thick fingers closed on his throat. With his free hand, Jason gripped the man's shoulder. Then he pulled. Slowly, agonizingly, Mark Brody's head began to separate from his body. Blood spewed from the shredded flesh in a crimson fountain. His horrible screams rose in pitch as his vocal cords were distended and torn. "Senna!" Long screamed, jabbing an customary finger at Brody's struggling form. Brody's head tore free from his twitching body, sending a carpet of gore spraying across the floor of the makeshift church, and spurring many in the congregation to their feet. Kelly stared on in paralyzed fear as Jason kicked his leg free from the last rope and lifted himself to his feet, still holding Brody's blood-spattered head. The homicidal giant used the prize as a bludgeon, swinging it at the panicked men who scurried past him. Screams filled the air, and finally, Kelly ran. Okay, that was chapters 6, 7, and 8 of Friday the 13th, Church of the Divine Psychopath. I want to thank everybody for listening, and again, I'm sorry that I'm not a trained voice actor or a professional narrator. I am doing this as a fan for love of the material. I know what it's like. For the longest time, I wanted these books until I finally got them. I know how hard it is to get them. So I hope everybody out there that's listening is enjoying getting to experience this novel. And I promise you, I'm going to do the whole Jason series, the whole Freddy series, and the whole Jason X series as soon as this one's finished. But in the meantime, be sure to subscribe, like, drop me a comment, and click the bell for future updates. But if I can reach 100 subscribers between now and the time I finish this book, then I will pick from my comments a lucky subscriber, and I will give them this book that I'm reading, my only copy, Friday the 13th, Church of the Divine Psychopath. I will ship it to them for free for their collection. They can do whatever they want with it. Everybody, thanks for joining me today. I'll be back tomorrow. Until then, have a great night.